You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And as usual, we're your hosts for the show. But of course, as you can plainly see, as we said, unfortunately, we had to do a pre-record on this. And, you know, we want to apologize for anybody that was ready to watch us this past Monday. Unfortunately, we were getting ready to go live. We were going to do it, but a bunch of stuff came up with the work schedule, and we couldn't pull it together in time, unfortunately. But one of the nice things is, if you guys haven't been watching lately, you'll probably notice that we got these YouTube shorts that are coming on every single day, 7 a.m., where we focus on a new character. Just a nice little thing, to keep some content on the channel and to refresh everybody's minds, too. Because, we obviously, we're going through a lot of the main characters like, Darth Vader or Princess Leia or Han Solo or something like that. But we're also featuring lesser-known characters from the expanded universe, all kinds of stuff. And what that'll serve is, if you guys are not familiar with some of these characters or you need a refresher, including us sometimes, I think, it's a really good thing to check that out. And so to that end, as you guys have been watching us the last 8 weeks or so, you know that we've been reviewing the Ahsoka series. And we thought it would be a good idea because we didn't really want to pile this in on the final episode review because that would have been a little bit too much. We just wanted to review that episode and let that review stand as its own thing. So what we thought we would do is actually do another episode, which is tonight, about recapping the series. Just giving basically our review of the series, our overall thoughts on the series, maybe some high points, low points, that kind of thing. Hopefully one of us, or maybe even both of us, are in the chats right now talking to you guys. Hopefully that's happening. Because, this is really a good thing that we've been wanting to discuss for a while. And it really breaks my heart that we can't do this live. But, at least we're doing it. And I have to say, I got to welcome all the new subscribers. We have just been getting a ton of new subscribers lately, which we love. And we hope that you guys will become an active part of our community, whether you're chatting, commenting, engaging in some way. There's going to be a lot to do on this channel soon. So welcome to all the new subscribers. So yeah, Ahsoka, as everybody knows, this is basically a discussion show, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna discuss. Got my tea. This has been kind of a bumpy. We both said in the last episode when we did the final, season finale review, that, of course, David will be eternally happy to hear this, but it really didn't live up to our expectations. I don't think anybody can really say that it totally lived up to fan expectations. But it wasn't quite the train wreck that a lot of people thought it was either. I always put it like the series is right there probably with Obi-Wan for me. It's not The Mandalorian, but it's also not the Book of Boba Fett either. So
True.
I don't know. What do you think?
No, I completely echo those thoughts.
All right. Well, then we'll see you guys.
That's
exactly,
cool. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And hey, we just said we'd have a show for you Friday. We didn't say how long it would be. I don't know, man. Considering we're famous for like the 1 or 2 hour shows, I doubt like a 5-minute show is in our blood. He's even sick. We ended up doing like an hour and 15 or something.
Yeah. But yeah, this was a very lackluster season. We all wanted more from Ahsoka. We all were hoping for more, and we'll get into the myriad of problems. But there were some good things. There were some highlights, but it's just overall, to start this conversation, it just really wasn't a good season.
No, it just, I think part of the problem, honestly, when you really stop and think about it, there's a couple of things that you can look at with this. And I think that the way you have to frame this discussion, if you're talking about bringing Ahsoka to life, being that she started out as an animated character, you have the way that she was depicted in the Clone Wars, but I don't necessarily count that because she was a lot younger, even during season 7. So I think that because this show was framed to be Rebels season 5, essentially, which is another thing that I want to point out. I'll get into a little bit more detail with that a little bit later in this discussion, but because there's some problems with that too. Because it's not exactly this thing where they were promising, oh yeah, you could just jump in, it's no problem. You don't have to have any previous knowledge of the characters. It's like, yeah, that's just not true. But
Hmm.
more than that, I think that you have to look at it this a couple of different ways. And of course, we can get into all of this. One, you have to look at the move from animation to live action. Now, technically, with Ahsoka, that happened in The Mandalorian and a little bit in the Book of Boba Fett, too, actually. And
Hmm.
some have even argued that her depiction in both of those shows was a little bit better and more full of life, let's just say, than in this
I
one.
would agree.
And I mean, that's true. And of course, the argument becomes, was that really more by design or was it just poor writing and, maybe direction? Because I don't blame Rosario Dawson for any of it. I mean, I think she's honestly just, hey, this is what they want. This is what I'm giving them. I mean, she's been in a lot of other
Hmm.
stuff. And like a lot of others have pointed out, her whole performance in the Book of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian had been a lot better. So there's that. So part of it is, obviously bringing her into live action more prominently and bringing the rest of the Ghost crew from Rebels into live action too. So that move, did they retain their what made those characters really special? For the most part, I would say, yeah. I mean, there were some questionable decisions, I think, maybe, especially with Sabine, especially early on. But, for the most
Hmm.
part, I would say yes. So that's one part that we can get into. The other part, of course, that we talked about in our review is, look, the first 2 or 3 episodes just weren't very good. It didn't really start to get good until episode 4, really. And then from there, it got better. But there was just basically an uneven, disjointed thing going on early on in the series, which I actually think hurt it. And
Hmm.
then, of course, you bookend that with a lackluster season finale, and it's basically going to irreparably harm the show, even though you did have a lot of really big highlights, like, Hu Yang, for instance, MVP.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, you had other things too that were in there that, of course, we'll talk about. But I think those are a couple of different elements that we could talk about. And then, of course, you have to finish that by, well, what was the point of the show? Because one of the biggest complaints, and I happen to agree with it, is it just kind of meandered along. There really wasn't any point. It's like, what was the story? What was the point of all this?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to chew on that one.
Yeah, I would say like some of my highlights as far as things regarding the show. One, the show is called Ahsoka, and I felt like she was a character that we found out the least amount of.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that was a big problem for me. Um, there were some things, of course, from a technical perspective, as far as like I think they suffered from using the volume too much in certain instances.
Much like
The
Obi-Wan, yeah.
acting, yeah, the acting was wooden and a lot of times, and it was flat acting. Or as David would like to say, she didn't want to come to work. Um, and then you had, excuse me, and then you have several. I get the fact that Star Wars is fantasy and it's not supposed to be scientific, but then there are some things that are just logically um, lacking in this show. Just things that just don't make sense. And I think that takes you out of it. Things It's like, okay, well, we're going to have this whole investigation, and then you don't believe like your people who've basically saved or helped create the new republic, and you know what I mean. Like you're not going to trust
Oh
these
no, that
people.
was a really big
That
thing
was
for me.
that was a really huge.
More so than even the Jack Bauer, because a lot of times, we compare that to 24 with the whole Jack Bauer thing.
Yeah.
Even more than that, because you could say, okay, with Jack, it's like, well, how do you have these variables, and you're just one guy. But yeah, when you have one of the generals in your military and you have all this intelligence, it's like she wasn't asking for anything more than just let me go investigate this. First of all, I
Right.
had a problem with the fact she was even asking that. It's like that's kind of part of your job. That would almost be like, an officer going, "Hey man, I really want to go out and patrol today." It's like, well, yeah, that's, kind of what you do, right? So
Right.
that's
Exactly.
that was the first problem that I had with it. But even if you somehow get beyond that, it's like, okay, she's going up to these, like, it's not like she's bringing you lightweight stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this stuff was either firsthand knowledge. There's already things going on. You pointed out in the review, I don't remember what episode it was, but it was the one where, he's all like, for the Empire. I think that was like episode 3. And
Yeah.
when we did the review on that, we were, of course, talking about that. And I remember you pointed out, like, in the next episode, when Hera was trying to get permission, which she didn't really technically should have needed, but just trying to get
Mm-hmm.
permission to investigate this. And I remember you pointing out, like, okay, they're all talking about how, well, there's not really anything out there. It's like, dude, you obviously have Imperial remnants in your
Yeah.
ranks. I
Yeah.
mean, what she's not saying, look, I want to launch an attack on, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like, let's not just do a shock and awe type thing. I'm just saying,
Right.
like, hey, we need to just
We just want to
focus our
investigate.
attention on this. Yeah,
Yeah.
just want to investigate. So there's that. There's a lot of logic things that just uh, didn't make any sense. So there's a lack of logic. Then there's the lack of explanation for a lot of stuff. Like you show us things and then you take it away without any explanation.
Mm.
One of your big ones was, of course, what the heck is Thrawn putting in these containers or whatever. But then you also have like, what's Balin's big plan? Like, what is he really after? So we're still in a guessing game with that. We're still trying to. I'm still guessing about where he even comes from and why he even. I mean, we know a little bit more about him. It's just like we know he comes from the Anakin Skywalker era, where the Clone Wars, he was around during that time period. But like, who was his master? How did he end up over here? Like all of this, like, where did this come from?
Well, here's my
Um,
problem with this. I mean, let's just take that because there's a lot there too, right? One of
mhm.
the problems that I had with that is like, okay, I can understand if you're telling me, okay, we're going to establish this stuff in season 1, and then we're going to explain it in season 2. But the problem is the way that they established this, like you said, it wasn't done like that. It was almost like there was a little bit of laziness there, It wasn't so much like a planned establishing, you know.
Yeah. And honestly, one of my biggest complaints, although it comes in one of the best episodes, the one when you see Anakin Skywalker, when Hayden Christensen reprises his role as Anakin, thought it was great, thought it was phenomenal. It looked good, felt good, felt like Star Wars. My biggest problem with it though is like nothing was explained. Like, okay, so did she fall off a cliff and just dive into the world between worlds? Is that a water location, just like the rock location on Lothal? Like, there was no explanation on how she got there, let alone how she got out of it. Um, and then it's just we still didn't really learn. Like, okay, well, what was? I mean, we kind of got what he was trying to teach her, but it still felt like that whole Anakin thing was missing something. Like
Yeah, it was
it just still
pointless. Like
yeah, it
everything in
had
this
yeah,
show.
exactly.
They're really, I mean, if you really
It was
wanted to
like, what was the
sum this,
point of that part?
that's what
Yeah.
was the point of any of it? I mean, if you really wanted to sum the show up in one word, it would be pointless. And again, I should probably stress this now, because if I don't stress it now, then, obviously we're going to go into this rest of this episode. I think this is something we actually probably have to keep reminding people of, and that is we did enjoy the show. It probably doesn't sound like it, but we did. And this is one of those situations where you have shows that are legitimately really good or great, and so naturally you enjoy them because they're technically good and the enjoyment level's high. You have other shows that are just so poorly written or whatever that it takes you out of it. It's kind of like, I don't know if I'm really enjoying this or not. With Ahsoka, it's kind of like we said, it's sort of like Obi-Wan, It was enjoyable, it was fun, but there are all kinds of problems with it. And that, unfortunately, if you're doing a recap or you're doing a review like we do, again, sometimes if people, because it's funny in the comments section, a lot of times I get people aren't usually, there's been a couple of times where people are like, okay, man, slow down. This is just a show. You're attacking us or whatever. But most of the time, people will accuse us either, or they don't necessarily accuse us. Either they'll disagree and say that they really like something and maybe we missed a point or whatever. And of course, that's a fair criticism. Then there's other people that will almost borderline attack us because they think we're being too lenient on something. Like I remember somebody was like, oh, well, if you like this or whatever, and they were talking about this show, then, I can't believe that you... And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, dude, yes, we enjoy the show, but have you not watched any of these reviews? Like, we're not exactly praising this thing constantly, But
Yeah,
there's
I
a
think
balance there.
the big thing is that when you're looking at Ahsoka, there's so much wealth of potential there, and that's where we want it
Yes.
to succeed.
Yes.
And and let's just cut to the chase. Dave Filoni, this is his baby.
Mhm.
This is his creation as far as character. Ahsoka was created in the Clone Wars. That character continued in Rebels, and it's kind of been like his. I hate to say it like this, but like this has been his pet, like his pet project. So
Well, it
now
is
that you
too,
have the
because
show,
don't forget, he created Rebels and all those characters as well. That was him without
exactly,
Lucas. So absolutely.
true story.
Hmm.
So now when we get to Filoni, as okay, we all said we wanted him to get into live action and becoming a live action director because he's told great stories in Clone Wars. He told great stories with Rebels. So we would love to see his hand in this. Now, granted, he's done well with some episodes with The Mandalorian, but that's because he had the backing of Favreau. I don't know if Favreau played that much of a role in him directing Ahsoka. Maybe not.
Doesn't feel like
He's
it to
still.
me.
It doesn't feel like it, but he's very much a novice at this.
Oh yeah.
And I think he'll be fine, but it's going to take some time for
Yep.
him to really understand and transition from animation storytelling to live action
Hmm.
and what that looks like. Um, but you have several different directors who directed all these different episodes, so it's not like was it like Tony Gilroy who did Andor, or Deborah Chow who did all of Obi-Wan. You had one single director doing all the episodes. In this situation, you had 8 different directors for the most part. Favreau, I mean, not Favreau, Filoni only directed 2 of these. The rest come from, other directors. So then you kind of have to ask yourself, like, okay, some of these wooden performances, some of these flat performances, is that the fault of the director? I say so. Some of the logic choices that were made, I think that's just due to the writing. So I think that falls more on Filoni because I think he's writing and producing these episodes. But I think when it comes into the hands of the acting, it falls a little bit more on the directors.
Yeah, but here's what's weird about that though. And you see this a lot of times on a lot of television shows, right? Because this is something that I know has come up. Yeah, I watched the Smallville rewatch podcast with Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum, and And of course, he has the Inside of You podcast as well that I watch, quite a bit. I haven't seen every episode, but I watch a lot of them because he's got really
Hmm.
good guests on it, and his interview style is really cool. But one of the things that people talk about all the time is like, you have all these different directors coming in to a TV show, like say a Law and Order or a CSI or, anything. Could be anything. Comedy, whatever. Point is you have like a long running show. Frasier, which is being rebooted like tomorrow. It comes out. So you have all these different seasons and episodes and everything of the show. And yet somehow, even though there's usually a different director for every show, like every episode, it still maintains this very similar quality. Now, of course, if you're a fan of a particular series, you could start to pick out, like sometimes, they might use the same director 2 or 3 times a season. And if you're watching, like, let's just say you're binging, like, let's say you're watching Seinfeld, right? Okay, you're on like season 5 of Seinfeld. Maybe the same guy has directed, 2 or 3 episodes per season. You could start to pick out the minutia of their style, like how you could see how
Hmm.
it's different from other directors.
Yeah.
But for the most part, though, it's a very similar thing. So it's different than, say, like the sequel trilogy, where you had, well, J.J. Abrams did technically do 7 and 9, but just some of the different directing styles is a little bit more apparent, I think, in films. And so you look at this, and yeah, you definitely have this thing where you have some of the logic choices and story direction and everything else that would firmly fall on Filoni's shoulders. But what's interesting about it is when you look at the directing problems, when you look at what we would consider poor directing choices, because I'm not even willing to say that it was badly directed. It was really more like the choices the director made were probably just not good. But it's interesting that you have these other directors, because like you said, it was done by multiple people. And I'm not sure. I know Filoni did 1 or 2 of them, right?
He did he did episode 1 and 5.
Okay.
Steph Green did episodes 2 and 3. Peter Ramsey did episode 4. Jen Getzinger did 6. Uh, Jita Vasant Patel did 7, and then Rick Famuyiwa did 8.
Okay, so what's interesting about that is a couple of things. One, there's only a couple of directors that have done previous shows. And
Hmm.
then there's a couple of directors that maybe did 2 episodes. But yeah, you almost, not quite, but you almost have a different director for every episode. And
Yeah.
yet, you have the same issues. Usually, like in The Mandalorian, you could always tell who was the really good directors versus who are the ones that were okay. Because you could see, I think, more of the different choices in that show.
Well, I definitely could tell the ones here because, like, episode 4 was definitely
Oh, it's like
light years
one of the
above.
best. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's one.
actually one
Yeah,
of the best episodes in the whole thing.
exactly. And then they started getting progressively better, especially when you get, and when I looked at some of the things that these folks have directed, of course, we got Dave Filoni who did episodes 1 and 5, which one was actually a good one. It kind of, for the most part, kind of started off well, where it kind of set the tone.
Mm.
You had a little stupid stuff. You had little stupid things where, it's that whole punk rock thing where Sabine's on the speeder bike and she's like listening to rock music or whatever.
Yeah, it was kind
But
of a ripoff of the whole Star Trek thing to me.
yeah,
The newer Star
but the
Trek. Surprised it
yeah.
wasn't a Beastie Boys tune.
But Peter Ramsey is the one who did 4, and he's also done Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. So it's like, okay, I could see that because that kind of seems like when you kind of look at it and you pair the episode with the director and what they've done in the past, you're like, okay, that makes sense in a way. But then you look at so the last 2 episodes with Geeta Patel, she did House of Dragon, which is part of the whole Game of Thrones franchise. and then Rick did the last one, which is he's also known, at least we know him mainly for Mandalorian,
Mhm.
which he's done phenomenal work in the Mandalorian series. And 8 was lackluster, but it wasn't horrible. It wasn't like, I mean, it had a lot of good points to it. It just
Well,
didn't
and again, I would
it
say
just
that
didn't deliver all the stuff that
that
I would
is
say directing wise, let me put it that way.
right.
Directing wise was good. The writing of it
That was
had
it.
some issues.
It was
Yeah.
just a poor season finale. I wouldn't even say it was a
Yeah.
bad episode. I think even during the review, we said, all
Yeah.
right, it's not a bad episode. It's just, and again, that's where you really have to make that distinction because a lot of
Mhm.
people, when they're watching, especially if they're uninitiated or they don't really understand how any of this stuff works, you know, and that's why I think actors are sometimes the way they are because it's like, look, I'm the one that's going to get blamed for this.
Mhm.
You know, when you have somebody who's not a good director, like they're not necessarily bad, they're just not great, right? Or you have somebody who maybe
Mhm.
is inexperienced, like in the case of
Right.
Filoni when it comes to live action. Okay, the actor might be perfectly pulling off exactly what the director is asking. So from that standpoint, they're doing what they're executing their job flawlessly.
Mhm.
But if it's a poor choice, the actor's the one that's going to get blamed for it. And this is what I kept trying to say when people would start blaming like Rosario Dawson,
Mario.
much like
Yeah.
what they did with, you know, Natalie Portman and Ewan McGregor and all that during the prequels. It's like, look, I mean, you have the director and they're saying, this is what I want. In the case of Lucas, he's famous for just act, you know? He wouldn't really give him any direction. You're just in the middle of this giant green or blue room and it's like, okay, imagine there's like 600 things going on and there's 3 people that you're talking to that you've never even seen drawings of or anything like that. And, you know, just act. I mean, that was basically what those poor people had to endure. And it's
Mhm.
the same thing. It's like, look, if they're saying to Rosario, look, you know, give me, you know, I really want it stoic. Because that's the nice word for wooden, right? When you're doing it
Mhm.
on purpose. It's like I want a very stoic, emotionless thing. She goes, okay. She's an acting professional who's getting
Mhm.
paid by the studio. The director's the one in charge of directing the actors. So this person wants a wooden, you know, stoic kind of emotionless thing. That's what I'm going to give them. Now, it ends up being a poor choice for this particular episode or show, but the actor delivered exactly what they wanted. Now, when you go a little bit further up the chain, the director in a lot of cases is doing what's written. You know, I mean,
Mhm.
now you can, as a director, and of course, Irvin Kershner famously did this a lot on Empire Strikes. This is why Empire Strikes Back and, you know, even Return of the Jedi are more revered than A New Hope in a lot of ways. Because
Mhm.
they took what was on the page and were, you know what, this doesn't make sense. Or sometimes what happens is, and this is why a lot of times you'll get rewrites. A lot of times you'll have a writer on set who you find out that what's written just, you know, it's not practical either period or for that day or, you know, stuff that they
It
wanted.
doesn't
It's
sound right coming from the actor. Yeah.
either that or even the scene. Like let's just say it was perfectly executed from the page. You watch the dailies and you're like, yeah, it's not really working. We need to rewrite this. So you'll have a writer on set doing that. But the point is, the writer is still guiding the process in that sense. Obviously, the director
Mhm.
can overwrite, no pun intended, the whole thing. But you know, it's the point is it's a team thing. It's a team sport here. And so a lot of times the actors get unfairly blamed, I think, for things that aren't their fault.
True. True. And that's where a lot, I think most of the my gripes come from the administrative side of things, if I can call it that.
Absolutely.
So it's more the people who are the decision makers, the directors, the writers, the producers, things of that nature. Like those are the people I'm holding more so accountable, because ultimately that's their role. They're supposed to be held accountable.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like, we often joked, okay, how many times is Ahsoka going to fold her arms or things like that? Little things like that. It's like, okay, I could let go. That's not that big of a deal for me. But the part that I have a problem with is like, okay, flat acting. Like for a good third of the series, it's like, okay, when are we going to get some life out of you? And you're the main title, you're the headliner, so to speak. And then you have characters where, you have someone like Balin, who is like, okay, he owns a room when he walks in. It's like, okay, yeah, let's listen to what he has to say, and you're captivated by him. When he's talking, and just how he delivers his line, and that's the thing, he's delivering. Whereas sometimes it feels like some of the actors were just saying their lines, or more, yeah, just kind of like, oh, okay, well, we have to go to see what Hera has to say. Yeah, you're right. It's just kind of,
Yeah.
it doesn't
In
have any
particular,
energy to it.
one example of that was one of the conversations between Ezra and Sabine when they were
Hmm.
riding,
Yeah,
across
those
the
little
the field,
terrain.
plains, terrain, whatever. And it really did feel like they were just reading dialogue. It wasn't that it was bad dialogue, it just felt like they were reading it. But here's the thing, and to that point, even though obviously Ray Stevenson is a great actor, so there's, I guess it's like a difference between, and this is where it gets really, really meaty, and it's funny because a lot of times I think our discussions could almost, like, we could almost do a podcast just on filmmaking or something in this regard, right?
Hmm.
Because we always take it in this direction. I mean, now obviously, I wouldn't do that though, because there's people. I mean, I watch a lot of YouTubers out there that are just like, wow, these guys really know their stuff when it comes to that stuff. But when you look at it, sometimes you have a situation like you said, where the actor basically just brings it. You have an actor who's just so good at what they do that you could give them a complete piece of crap dialogue, scene, whatever, and they're going to turn it into something. I mean,
Hmm.
it's still the polishing the turd thing, but it's it's like they can just bring so much life into a lifeless thing. That's one example. The other thing, though, and this is where I think sometimes actors get unfairly blamed, is sometimes the writing is just so bad that they're just, it's almost like it's written. You're perfectly executing everything, but it isn't coming across. It's almost like it's coming across to the audience as bad acting when it really isn't. There's a fine
Yeah,
line in some ways, I think, between bad acting and bad writing. Not always.
true. Yeah, I agree, and I just think that when you're dealing with some people, um, and like I said, with the this is what we mean by it can't be written like a animation. It's because a lot of these
Yes.
episodes didn't go together. Like
Nope.
it just didn't gel. So it's kind of like when we talk about episodic television, where it's just like everything's almost like a one off of each other, and it's really just not a whole lot of continuity to things. Um, like I said, the biggest problems is there are a lot of things that were brought up that weren't answered. You got Balin on his own mission. You have Ahsoka going to the purgatory world, wherever she was. They didn't still say it was the world between worlds, but that's what we know it to be. Um, but now it's like, okay, well, how did she get there? How did that happen? And there's no answers for those things. And we just had to accept it. And that just didn't um, make a whole lot of sense. Then there's a logic things that just didn't make that, or lack thereof, when it came to storytelling. You got generals and Jedi who are telling you like, hey, some guy running around stealing hyperdrives. Hey, these dark Jedi just broke this prisoner out. Hey, like, and it's like, oh no, it's fine. Like, no, it's not. Like, you're the New Republic. Like, no wonder why you guys fell. It's just like, that's why Palpatine was able to take you guys over. You're stupid. And it's things like that really makes the audience feels like, okay, if I can figure this out, why can't you? Because then it's like, the audience wants to be led down a path where it's like, man, what would I do? Or man, this is a hard decision to make. I didn't feel that. Like, I didn't feel like any of the decisions that were made me question what I would do.
Well, neither did
Because
they. If you think about it, there was no tension, no nothing. I mean, they're storming. What was that in episode 7? They're basically storming that fortress, and one of the things that one of my friends brought up, this Star Destroyer, just like just firing. This, I think, was in the season finale, where they're just firing on these people, right? And it's like the lasers are so far apart. It's like, can't you guys? I mean, you would think that just by sheer overwhelming force, and that's one of the problems.
Well, even the bigger thing from that, though, it's like, okay, you have. So if we're talking about ammunition here, if I had a handgun and the bullet is like, this big, okay, I could see that not making a whole lot of concussive force if it hit something. If I have a cannon shell that's being fired, that's going to have a lot of concussive repercussions. So you mean to tell me that this Star Destroyer that's shooting, it's meant to destroy like encampments, is meant to destroy like huge ships, yet it's firing down on these little people on the ground, and it doesn't even knock them off the horse, or what I'm saying? Like,
exactly.
They're fried. The shots are landing so close to them, and they're still being able to hold on. Like, that's not believable. And I get it. It's fantasy.
They're going to say it's the Force, but here's the thing, and this goes back to what you're talking about, episodic. This is where I think Ahsoka really went off the rails as well. So you brought up the whole, they were trying to do episodic television, and there was no connective. The thing is,
you're right.
The problem is they didn't commit fully to it, because usually what an episodic series will do, you watch any series of any genre that's episodic in nature. Obviously, the closest would be Star Trek and Star Trek: The Next Generation, if you're more along the lines of Star Wars. At least that's something that everybody in pop culture can relate to. Yeah, I know there's other fantasy series that you can relate to. Doctor Who even being one of them, right? When they're truly episodic, it's usually something that is a, problem or whatever of the week. It's like, whatever it is, it's introduced in that episode, it's concluded in that episode. Now, true episodic television will sometimes have a connective thread that runs throughout the season or even the whole series. In the case of Star Trek, it's the simple premise, right? They're on a 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds and, seek out new life and all that. I mean, before I end up just giving the whole narration in the beginning. Yeah. But the point is, that's the connective tissue that runs it all together. In a lot of procedural dramas, it's okay, you have a precinct, or you have, a particular law firm or something like that. And, So you're seeing like case by case, but obviously the characters might be going through marriages and divorces and different things that
Hmm.
might be reflected through the whole series. Or another big one that they do a lot of times, Criminal Minds did this, where they had like and NCIS actually did this for like at least the first season, and it bled into season 2, where they actually had a villain that was pretty much a thread. It was a big story arc through the first season. And Criminal Minds did a thing to where they had a particular serial killer that popped up. There'd be like a 3-episode arc, and then they introduced them. And then, throughout the episodes, it would be like, well, wait a minute, this looks like it could be the work of whatever. So it wasn't just the serial killer of the week. It was this guy that, pops up from time to time. And then, of course, they concluded that. But episodic television will have certain things that connect it, but the crux of it is still introduced and concluded in the same episode. Then, of course, you have the more serialized type of series, like a 24, or, you know, you go more modern. It's just almost every show now is kind of like that. In fact,
Hmm.
if you want to continue Star Trek as the example, then like Discovery would be the perfect one for that one. So you
Hmm.
have that. The problem that Ahsoka had, and what Dave Filoni did incorrectly, is that he tried to do both. He was trying to do the best of both worlds in a way. He was making it somewhat episodic, but also had this continuing storyline. And of course, what you end up happening is you just you basically have incomplete
Hmm.
storylines for the whole like series thread, and then you have pointless things that happen as like an episodic type of thing. So that was a good point that you were talking about, because yeah, that was one of the biggest issues, is that you can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to commit to which one you want to do. Um, and I just think that like I love Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka. I think she looks the part. I think she does great. I mean, we've seen her do great when she was on Mandalorian. Uh, and I even like, you know, Sabine's not that bad. Ezra's cool. Um, Balin's awesome. Shin, you don't really know too much about her. I mean, she just has the look of a, crazed woman. But other than that, I mean, I really don't see the acting range in her just yet. Um, Morgan Elsbeth, haven't seen a whole lot in her. Um, Hera, I like, not for the reasons that most guys like her, but I like Hera. Um, and I like the fact that I like the look of the things. I mean, like I said, there's some positives. I think Chopper was done very well. I think Hugh Yang brought a lot of life and a lot of energy, a lot of levity. Um,
Well, it's nice that it was
into
done by the same guy that voiced him in the Clone Wars too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad they kept that continuity. I liked the episode 4 where you brought in Hayden Christensen. I mean, like once we got into the world between worlds and that whole vibe, it looked really cool. It felt like Star Wars, and that was a moment where I felt like, okay, this really looks like Rebels,
Yeah.
and but it also felt like Star Wars at the same time too.
Yep.
And it's not just because it's Hayden Christensen; it's just the music, the vibe, like everything was kind of a little bit more on it. Um, and then we come out of it, and then it's kind of like, well, back to reality again in a way. So, um, the season finale, uh, I liked how they kind of kept Ezra doing his thing where he always ends up stealing some some trooper's uniform and
Mm-hmm.
wearing it. So I
Mm-hmm.
love that the fact that they brought that back in. I love the fact that um uh Thrawn was his typical self in the sense of he's willing to, like, you can see him get agitated, but at the same time he still has a sense of calm to him. But then there were some other stupid things that were done. Once again in that episode, okay, Sabine magically was able to pull a lightsaber to her hand, and we talked about this last episode. But then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, yeah, trust me that I can throw you across this. Like,
Exactly.
no, if that had been Ahsoka, sure,
It's like a little bit of,
but
now she has a little bit of Rey in her with this one,
yeah, exactly. It's like now all of a sudden she has this ability, and that's the part. I was like, okay, really, are they really doing this? It takes you out of it, or as David would say, it isn't earned yet, for her to be able to do that type of stuff. So there were some good things. I really wish, like I said, I really wish we'd have learned more about Ahsoka and what's been going on. Where has she been all this time? Just really diving into the character. I feel like there wasn't a whole lot of character development. We saw the tension between her and Sabine. That was fine.
Yeah.
But then that was it. It was like, okay, we get the fact that they're, she's like, okay, well, I left you and you abandoned me, and it's weird now, but okay, where have you been? What's why weren't you in the original trilogy? I mean, we all know the real reason, because she wasn't created at that time, but now that she's here, like, you have to explain it now. So there's still so many questions that the show never really answered for us as fans, and now we're forced to wait until they decide to do season 2 to hopefully get there, or maybe they never do. We just have to accept that she's here, and it's just like, okay. So I really just want the writing to firm up. I really want the directing and the act, the directors to direct the actors to give us more. It can be done because we've seen it in Mandalorian, and you got A-list actors. You have Giancarlo Esposito. You have Rosario Dawson, another A-list actor. You have people who have acting chops and range. Use it. This is why, and this is why we get excited, because it's like, oh, okay, these people are playing these roles. I can't wait to see what they bring. Moff Gideon, love him, absolutely love him. I mean, he really makes you feel like he's the big bad, and it's like, okay, that's what we want. When we see Thrawn, David had a point where he was kind of like, well, he felt like, and I get it, that Thrawn doesn't, you know, he's kind of like Palpatine in a way, where Palpatine, when he shows up, he really, you really don't, his power isn't really on display like that. But it's the fact that, you have to wait to see how his plan unfolds, and that's the power of Thrawn. And I think a lot of people, if you're
Well,
not familiar with that character, you'll miss that.
well, that's it. I mean, there's two things you got to look at if you're just talking about Thrawn. I mean, there's so much, but if just to get on the last point here, if you're just talking about Thrawn, I can understand the criticism, because part of the reason why everybody was praising Thrawn is because those of us who have followed him since, say, 1991, when he was introduced in
Mhm.
Heir to the Empire, and we've had like 30 plus years of him. And even in the new canon stuff, you just jumped aboard, let's say you just saw The Force Awakens and you're like, oh, this is cool, I want to get into this. And you start getting into that. If you have prior Thrawn knowledge, then you're going to be satisfied. You might go, well, I think they could have done a little bit more or whatever. But the point is, you understand the character, you know who he is, you can fill in the blanks. And there's quite a few blanks that they did in this series. If you're actually coming into this where you know nothing about Thrawn, then I can understand that, because even to the point of Palpatine had a very similar introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that was similar was they did set up Thrawn just by the way people talked about him, and, the fact that,
Mm-hmm.
you got people
And
like
that's
the
how they
Night
felt about the
Sisters.
Emperor.
Sure. And that's the
Because they
thing.
always are like, oh, the Emperor's coming here. Yes,
Yep.
he's most displeased with your apparent lack of progress. And it was more so like it was inferred fear. It's like, okay, we've all seen how powerful Vader is. You know, we first meet him, he's choking people with his bare hand. Well, I could say bare, but you know, he's choking people. He's lifting these guys off on the, you know, off their feet. You know, he's force choking people across ships. He lopped off Luke's hand. You know, okay, Vader is, for all intents and purposes, the big bad. But then
Yep.
you keep hearing about the Emperor, the Emperor, the Emperor, and you're like, okay, well, who is this Emperor guy, first of all? And then how powerful is he if he's like controlling Vader? You know, and it's like, okay, you're wondering, okay, is he another Tarkin? You know, because Vader kind of had to listen to Tarkin, so you're kind of wondering that. Then you see this doddering old man, you know, that's coming up. He's got this hood on. He's pasty white. You don't really know what anything about him, but then in Return of the Jedi, you find out very quickly who Sheev Palpatine is. And I think that's exactly what we're going to have with Thrawn, because
Well, we
Thrawn, of
had
course,
it.
you
We
know,
had it though. That's my point. That's
well,
what I
we
was
kind of had
getting
it
to.
in on Rebels, yeah.
Well, no, we have it now. Because if you look at how powerful they depicted the Night Sisters, and they're subservient to Thrawn, there's that same connection between Vader
Yeah,
and the Emperor
true.
versus Night Sisters and Thrawn. That's what actually
That's
gives
true.
us a context in this show that a lot of people, I think, overlook. In fact, there's a lot of people that are subservient to Thrawn if you really think about it in this, but the Night Sisters in particular kind of have what I call that Vader effect. So there's that. But again, I can understand that you know, people that have never had any kind of experience with him or whatever, it's like, because the buildup with the Emperor was just a better written introduction than this. And a lot of what Filoni was relying on subconsciously, apparently, was the fact that we kind of know who Thrawn is. Once again, and there was a couple of things, actually, even backtracking to what I was going to say probably like 10 minutes ago, because it was the first part of when you were talking about all this, the transition from the animated characters to the live action. That's one part of it. But then the second part of it is pretty much the fact that this is Rebel Season 5. See, this is one of the
Mhm.
weaknesses of this whole show. It really assumes and relies upon the fact that you've seen Rebels at the very least,
Mhm. Right.
if not the Clone Wars and everything else. You know, this is not a show that people can walk into. Yes, technically you can take it for what it is, but you might be critical. Like, well, was this Thrawn guy? I mean, I'm not seeing this. Well, yeah, if you come from Rebels, where Thrawn actually was introduced into the new canon, well, I can't
Mhm.
really say that, into like a show, right? Because
Right.
he started out as one of the main bad guys in the expanded universe, and then Timothy Zahn wrote new novels for the new canon. So he
Right.
still was a literary character, basically. And then, of course, Filoni brought him into Rebels, which then brought him into, you know, all the proper stuff. So you have that. But again, I think that that's one of the biggest missteps that Filoni did when writing this and creating this, was the fact that it's one thing where I think if it was better written and better done, I don't think it would actually be a bad thing, because I've often said, look, we need stuff for the hardcore fans. Let's stop
Mhm.
making things for the casual fans. But the problem is the way he did it, the over reliance on nostalgia in this show was just nauseating at times, to be honest. There were some cool things, like 3PO's appearance was great. And, you know, much to my complete surprise, it was Anthony Daniels in the suit. I'm like, is the suit getting a little heavy for him? Because he's getting close to 80 or whatever. I mean, it's, you know, because he had that weird lean that he was doing the whole
Mhm.
time. But it added, not only did it give us the nostalgia that some of us longtime fans like, but what it did was it actually moved the story along, and it made perfect sense. If they did stuff like that, it would be great.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we really wanted more for Ahsoka, and I have to, you know. So David will shut up. Yes, I can see that it was a bad show. If that's what he wants to hear. overall, I think it was a bad season. It had good things in it, but I don't think enough good could outweigh the gravity of the bad that took place. Um,
I'm gonna reserve though. I'm tempted to agree, but I'm gonna binge it one day because I want to
okay.
see how it stands. Like if you watch it from beginning to end.
Hmm.
Now, granted, you can make the argument that you shouldn't have to do that, but
Right. Yeah, but and that's why I said, I think that overall, because even if you do binge it, like the problems still stand,
sure they do, and it's
like
just
and
that's why I
that's
say it's right along the lines of Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was technically a bad show too. They had some great moments and had a lot of potential. I mean, if you think about
mhm,
it, it's the same kind of thing because Ahsoka, we think, unlike, I mean, I don't know. I know Ewan McGregor wants to do a second Obi-Wan season. The difference is, I think, with Ahsoka, there's going to be a second season for this show,
yeah,
and because of
you have
that,
to.
there's still a lot of potential, and they could still turn the whole thing around. So you might be right. It might be a bad season of an otherwise good show, but having the bad season be your first season is not a good
Exactly.
marketing
Good
plan.
at
It's
all. Exactly.
I mean, it's terrible. But what do you think of overall? It's funny. I went back and I saw, some Rebel stuff, and I have to say, more so than I remembered. He really did nail it with the live action version of the animated characters. I mean, the actors that he cast for these, I mean, it's uncanny,
Oh yeah, I
really.
mean, as far as like the look of them all, yeah,
The look and
absolutely.
even the acting of it. Because I was initially critical of some of like the Sabine stuff and things like that. But then when I went back and watched a couple of random episodes, it's like, I mean, it's there. Again, it's just not.
Hmm.
He wrote Rebels better than he wrote Ahsoka. That's the problem. But I mean, if you're just looking at the performances and the look of each of the characters, it's like, I mean,
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is like, you want them to feel like the animated characters, however, you still need them to, I guess you would feel like they would evolve once they got to live action. And I think that's the part that people were missing. It's just the evolution.
well, it's not even. I mean, there's that. I can see that. I don't necessarily. I think it's really more of a situation of you want it to feel like a live action show, not somebody writing animation for live action. I
Hmm.
don't necessarily mind the characters even being somewhat the same, but it shouldn't. You know what I mean? It's like you're writing
Yeah.
live action, you're not writing animation. So write these characters for live action, not live action version of an animated character. Because again, I mean, I don't think that if you just isolate the performances of each of the actors and the characters, they're fine. It's just the situations they're in and everything else. Because like you said, what's ironic about this whole thing is that probably the best live, I mean, Huang's performance aside, it's Balin. Balin's like the standout character, and he's
Hmm.
new. He's brand new.
Yeah.
So how is it that your best character is somebody who's totally new that nobody's familiar with?
Yeah. I mean, but I think Balin just, once again, I think his natural ability just fills up a room. It's kind of, uh, you know, one of those, uh, like a Denzel, it's just like he just owns his space, and because he's such, um, because I think he's also done, if I'm not mistaken, I think Ray Stevenson did a lot of theater work too prior to,
Yeah, he
so
did.
he knows, and that's another thing too. Is like theater versus, f- you know, just being on film. You know how to deliver and portray yourself and your mannerisms and all the things,
Yeah,
and
you know how to
like
emote, basically.
emote differently and in multiple different ways. Because if I'm all the way in the mezzanine section, like, you have to believe my character from up there. You know what I mean? Versus on film when everybody can see you. So I think that also plays a part into it as well.
Well, it would be an interesting discussion, and maybe we'll do this one day, where we'll take the Balin character and we'll just go through an analysis of it. Because, first of all, it would be cool to just dissect and speculate and all that, just Balin, right? But one part of that discussion that I think would be very interesting, and it would be very interesting to do with a live audience. That's why I don't want to do it on a pre-record, but to actually do an analysis of, is it that the Balin character is so interesting, or that Ray Stevenson is such a good actor? Because you can make the argument for both, and it's really tough to figure that out. So that would be a really good, besides obviously getting into the character himself, I think that that would be
Hmm.
a really cool
Yeah,
show topic. Who knows? Maybe
that'd be
that could be
fun.
Mondays or something. It's like, you know,
Yeah, could
I
be.
mean, while we're doing the whole Ahsoka thing, I mean, eventually, we'll let it go. But hey, the show just ended, right? But yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the show just didn't live up to its potential. Not even so much our expectations or any fans' expectations, but the potential that it had.
Hmm. I
And it
agree.
it didn't suck, but it wasn't great. So it's just kind of like, I mean, it had some really cool moments, and I think that that's really what makes you lament what could have been. And then it had some moments that you could take or leave, and then it had other moments where you're just like, you're yelling at the television, and I mean, it's you know just I mean, you just get all cranked up and angry about it because it's such a stupid or bad decision or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Final thoughts on this thing before we wrap up
Um,
Ahsoka for good until there's a season 2 that we can talk about?
yeah, I just hope for better, man. I just hope that
Mm,
they learn the lessons. I hope they listen to it and watch, shows like ours or other people who've, have the same complaints that we've had, and fix those problems and realize, and just like, okay, take that back to the lab and really dial it in and really just like, okay, let's fix this writing, let's fix this directing, let's punch it up and deliver to the people with what they want to see.
yeah, I would agree. I mean, I would hope that they would, first of all, make up your mind. Do you want to do an episodic series, or do you want to do kind of like a series long story arc? And if you want to do the combination, make it heavier one way or the other, because there's a lot of basically like serialized series, right? Where it's pretty much like a movie that's divided into a bunch of, like when we talk about Cobra Kai, for instance, that's very much a movie that's divided into a bunch of chunks. But even though it's a complete story arc, the thread runs through, there are some episodes of that show that do operate as somewhat of an episodic type of a thing. They might be a bridge between two parts of the story. So it's kind of like a one off. So you could do that. You can have something where the series is a complete continuation, but then you can
Hmm.
have certain episodes that are like bridge episodes to where they are basically a one and done, right? To where something is introduced and then it's basically concluded in that single episode. Or do you want to flip it the other way where you have just complete episodic type of a series and you just have a few things that carry on through the entire season or maybe the entire series? So I think that Filoni really has to decide, what does he want the show to be? And really, you could just say that as a generic thing. What do you want this show to be? Because I think he's trying to make it all things. because it's sort of like
Yeah.
how you and I opened it, right? I mean, okay, we could talk about the problems and we could talk about the good things. But the one thing that I don't know if we've really necessarily emphasized, although we did talk about it a little bit tonight, is when you file away, okay, here's what's good, here's what's bad. What's the point? Why did you even make this? It's
Hmm.
what was the point of the show?
All right.
And that's something that I think at its core, every series needs to answer. What is the reason for this show's existence?
Yeah. Why are we here?
I mean, even something that was they really dropped the ball with the Book of Boba Fett in a lot of ways. We all know that. However, they did answer the question of why the show existed.
Hmm.
First of all, it was showing you how Boba Fett got out of the Sarlacc pit, which is a big thing. And then it showed you pretty much what he was doing after. And I mean, you could say what you want about that show, whether you loved it, hated it, maybe you fall somewhere in between. It had a reason for existing. It basically had a point. The Mandalorian has a point. Obi-Wan had a point. Ahsoka, it's sort of like you said, it wasn't even about Ahsoka half the time. It was more
Hmm.
like an ensemble cast. They should have just called it Rebels,
Oh, they
honestly,
should have called it like the New Republic or something.
or
Or
something. Right, right.
yeah.
And then maybe you feature it almost more like the Rangers of the New Republic show that they were going to do with
Hmm.
Gina Carano. I mean, with the Cara Dune character. So they could have done something like that. But I mean, when you call something Ahsoka and you give us what you gave us, it really doesn't. It really would have made more sense to call the show Sabine, to be honest,
Yeah.
because that really is who this whole thing was more focused on. I mean, if I had to sum up, like if somebody put a gun to my head and said, "Okay, you got to come up with a reason why the show existed and what was the point of it," as I was sweating, you know, basically closing my eyes, waiting for that bullet to enter my head, I would probably utter something along the lines of, it was about Sabine, who had basically lost her way as a potential Jedi, who pretty much was desperate to find her friend. And it was about how she came to terms with who she really is and what she really wanted to do. Because if you really
Yeah.
stop and think about it, that's really what the story arc of that whole show was. And yet, it's
Yeah.
called Ahsoka.
Hmm.
It's those are the kinds of things where it's like, okay, there's a problem here. So,
When the logic is in logic.
yeah,
But
yeah, exactly. But, look, it comes down to you guys. I'm sure we've been having an incredible chat. Like I said, depending on how fast I was able to get, with the crew, all this stuff set up that we were doing, and being that this thing premiered at 11, there's a good chance that, I could be on. Although my call tomorrow morning is quite early, actually. So that's another thing that will determine how tired was I. So hopefully I was on tonight. Hopefully Daryl was on tonight. We were all chatting in there. But whatever you guys are thinking, put it in the comments section. Continue on our Discord. We got a Discord. The link's in the description. You can continue the discussion there if you want. I check it all the time. Obviously there's our Facebook group. So there are ways that we can continue this discussion, of course, and you can let us know what your thoughts are. And of course, as always, look, if you guys have any topic ideas or anything specifically you would like us to cover, make sure you put that in the comment section. I read all the comments. I answer them all. So, that's an option too. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe Monday, maybe we do the Balin thing. Maybe we do something else. We'll figure that out. But hopefully you guys enjoyed tonight's show. It should be on live Monday. And I believe we'll be on live a week from tonight as well. So I think things, hopefully, I mean, unless something happens to your schedule, because usually that's what'll happen, right? Mine will
yeah.
stabilize, yours will get crazy. But yeah, this is actually fun. You know, I really enjoyed talking about Ahsoka, even though some people might think that we were bagging on it a little bit, but whatever. All right. So until Monday, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.